Hello and welcome to Google Developers Live. You're on the Chrome channel. I'm Peter Lubbers, and with me today I have special guest Addy Osmani, who is a developer programs engineer in the Google Chrome developer relations team. Addy, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Great. So today we're really excited to talk about Yeoman. There's been a lot of buzz around it already. It was announced a couple of weeks ago at Google I/O by Paul Irish. And Addy is one of the main contributors of the tool/workflow optimization, and want to talk a little bit more about that today. Addy is going to give us a demo, talk a little bit about it. We have the moderator questions as well. A lot of you have sent your questions in. We've had hundreds of votes already on those questions, so we'll go through all of that. Total time will be about an hour, and let's dive right in. So, Addy, what? First of all, the pronunciation, is it Yeoman?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, perfect. What exactly does Yeoman do, and how does it help me as a developer?
Okay, so Yeoman is an opinionated workflow for creating web applications. And when we created it, we took a look at the way that developers are currently creating web apps, and they're spending quite a lot of time on things like process. They're spending a lot of time trying to figure out what tools they should be using, getting those tools into things like a build process and testing harnesses and stuff like that. And then they're spending a lot of time writing boilerplate code when they want to start using particular frameworks. So in the JavaScript world, for example, MVC frameworks. And we thought about how we could possibly, perhaps bring a whole set of opinionated tools together and just give developers a single option that works well and has everything set up for them, so they can spend less time on process and a little bit more time focusing on the logic for their apps.
Great. So, how did you come up with the name?
So Paul Irish thought up the name on his way out of the bathroom one day, and it wasn't sort of, they had a vote about what name to go for. It wasn't initially the most popular name. The other one was Web App Boilerplate, but we figured, there are a few too many boilerplate projects out there at the moment, and Yeoman was a good fit. So Yeoman, in sort of old English times, was a servant to the sovereign that would perform a number of different tasks for them. And we thought, that's a pretty good fit, and the name stuck.
Excellent. Yeah, I like the new logo for it. So, is it like at the high level? Is it easy to install, to get started with it? How does that work?
Yeoman takes just a few minutes to install, and once it's done for the first time, you don't have to do that again. You can just easily start using it to create projects. Whenever you're working with particular dependencies, whether it be sort of Twitter Bootstrap or HTML5 boilerplate, when we fetch those, we actually cache them. So the time taken to actually get those things is really only in the first instance. Every single other time, we're just fetching it from cache, and we provide you ways to sort of update those if you want to. But getting started is extremely easy. Anybody can get started in just a few minutes. It's a fairly easy tool to use, I think.
Right. Now you say anybody. So is it available for Windows? I think a lot of the demos I saw were Mac-based, but what's the latest on that?
At the moment, we're sort of targeting Nix-based environments, but we do have Windows on our sites, and we're hoping to sort of target Windows users with the next version of the project.
Right. Now, tell me a little bit before we get into an actual look of it. Tell me a little bit about the current status of it. It was announced at I/O. What's the current status? How can you get involved with it?
So the project was announced at I/O, as you mentioned, and we've spent a few weeks refactoring it and getting a few new ideas into the project. One that we're really excited about is the concept of generators. For anybody that's sort of used Ruby on Rails before, you might be familiar with their generator system. And we thought, it would be pretty cool if we were able to bring that to front-end development so that, again, so developers don't have to spend that much time writing boilerplate code, and they can just say, I want to use a particular framework. Maybe there's a Yeoman scaffold available for it, and I can just start writing out my project logic without having to do all the other manual plumbing that I normally have to. So we've been working on that. We've been working on sort of tidying up the rest of the project, just making sure it's as stable as possible. And yeah, I'll hopefully be showing you some of that stuff today.
Okay, excellent. Well, how about maybe you can share your demo with us, and we can dive right into it. So take a look at it.
Certainly.
What have you got there?
Okay, so we're going to start off with a command prompt. So Yeoman supports a few different commands, and you can access the list of these using help. And the list you'll see at the moment includes init for initializing and scaffolding projects using our generators, build for building an optimized version of your project, server, test, and a few others that I'll talk about in a few minutes. Now, the basic idea that we showed in the first video about Yeoman was that you could kick off a project using Yeoman init. Now, over the past couple of weeks, because we've been writing this generator system, we figured, well, why isn't init also just another scaffold? And so when we kickstart this off to create a new project, what you'll see is that you get a welcome prompt. This is actually a scaffold. Anybody can go and create their own one. They can include their own ASCII art, their own dependencies and things. There's actually already a project in here at the moment, so I'm just going to say course. And it's now going to ask me what I'd like to include in the project. So here, in this particular scaffold, we're going to, by default, include HTML5 boilerplate and Twitter Bootstrap. We find that quite a lot of developers use those regularly. But we thought, let's ask them if they'd like to also include the Twitter Bootstrap plugins, the jQuery plugins, in case they perhaps want to use those too. You can then go and configure options, and we'll then go and pull the latest versions of the HTML5 boilerplate project, Compass Bootstrap, so you can actually edit the Twitter Bootstrap source files. And we'll also set up sort of a test harness for Jasmine so you can start writing unit tests. Now, I'm going to show you something I think is pretty cool. I have to switch windows very quickly. A second. So we just generated a directory containing a bunch of different files, and the index file that's created will look quite familiar to people who've used HTML5 boilerplate before.
Right.
And when you scroll through it, you sort of see that it's fairly regular until we get to the very end. And in the end, you can see this block. Let me just zoom in a little bit so it's a little bit clearer to see. So this is a really interesting block. This code right around it, so like a HTML comment, this is actually a declarative way that we've provided people to define what final output file you would like all of the files inside a block to get concatenated and minified into. So rather than you having to go and set up any of this stuff inside a configuration file, you can configure where any block of scripts finally gets output to just using your HTML, which we thought was quite fun.
Yeah, that's
but what this actually provides you with is fairly basic. Let's go back to the command prompt very quickly. 1 second. Let's clear this up. Now, developers will often, when you want to get a dependency for a project, whether it be jQuery or Backbone or something else, you'll either go to GitHub and try to get the latest version of the project, or you'll go to the project's homepage and get the latest version that they've made available from there. That involves sort of opening up a web browser and doing quite a few manual steps to get it, and then saving it locally, etc. We thought, well, systems like NPM are really nice to pull packages down from. Why don't we provide developers with something a little bit similar? So if I, for example, wanted to go get a dependency, I already have jQuery in this project, but let's say I wanted to grab it anyway. I could simply go and do Yeoman install jQuery. It'll check our registry for that, and if it finds it, it'll simply fetch it and provide you with a local version. That's very simple. You didn't have to go and open up a web browser or do anything else. If I wanted to include something like, say, Backbone, it's a very similar process. Split second, you've got the dependency, and this isn't just going and fetching you Backbone. It's actually resolving all the different dependencies that a particular library might also need. So Backbone, for example, will need jQuery itself, and it'll also need underscore. We've actually gone and fetched those for you just when you did Yeoman install Backbone. So it's very easy for you to go and start using libraries in your project, regardless of whether they have a ton of dependencies themselves or not. Another really interesting thing that I'd like to show you is an example of another type of Yeoman generator. When I mentioned earlier on Twitter, I think a week or two ago, that we're working on this generator system, quite a few people, and I think on the moderator queue as well, were asking, are we going to support Ember? Are we going to support Backbone and Angular and all of these other frameworks? And I'll talk a little bit about that for a moment. A second. Let's just switch back to the terminal. So if I want to start using, so I've scaffolded out a very basic project just now. If I want to start using a library like back, and I want to actually not have to write all the boilerplate code for my models and my collections and my other bits and pieces, I can actually just go and do Yeoman init backbone all. And that'll automatically go and create me a scaffolded version of my application. Now I'm going to run this in just a second. Generators are actually really interesting. They don't just support scaffolding out an entire project. Every single part of a framework that we can scaffold out is considered a subgenerator. So if I wanted to generate a new model, all I have to do is backbone model, and then just my model name. The exact same thing with a view or a collection. And that would work as well. For this case, I want to basically create all of them just for our demo. And I know that I'm going to be overwriting some existing files, and so I'm just going to pass the force flag in there. And very, very quickly, it's gone and it's created a bunch of different directories from my application, models, collections, views, routes, that are going to be needed by the additional files that this particular framework uses. And I've got sort of, I can't tell if you can see the highlights. But
yeah, we can see it.
I've got my application view, I've got a template for the view, I've got a model created, I've got a collection created, and we can actually go and inspect one of these files. So if we were to go to app.js, views, application view, take a look at that, it's actually scaffolded out an extremely basic view that we can use. Now, I very quickly show you something else. I'm going to skip right back to the prompt very quickly to show you the built-in Yeoman server task. Let's see. So I'm going to actually preview this application in a second. So there we go. Right. So if I do Yeoman server now, and I'll need to, pardon me for having to switch through so many windows.
No problem. What does the Yeoman server do?
So Yeoman server basically kicks off a local HTTP server that you can use to preview your application. And when you run that, we go and we automatically compile all of your CoffeeScript files, all of your Compass files, and any other files that might need a level of compilation in them to provide you with sort of an intermediate view of your application. Consider it something a little close to a production level build, but not just quite there, in case you want to still edit some source files and make other changes before we optimize everything.
Great. And what server are you using for that? Or is it configurable?
So it's configurable. We're also sort of tying this into the Yeoman watch task, which again does a very similar thing. If you make changes to your Compass or CoffeeScript files, it'll automatically go and compile those files for you. So your preview is constantly up to date without you having to go and manually do anything.
Excellent, excellent. Wow.
So let me take you to the preview. Now, you should be seeing a window that's fairly plain at the moment. There's nothing really in there, but there's actually that's actually our application. It's a very blank looking window, but we go to the developer tools, and what you see, I'm not sure if anybody can see this, but there's actually a line that says "Hello from Backbone."
Yep.
And if we flip back to Sublime very quickly, take you through the code. Just a second. If I take you through the code, so we've got an application view, we've got myapp.js is basically a file which contains just the initial part of your application. It contains the namespace generation stuff. So here, for example, I'm just defining my namespace. Where do I want my models and collections and other bits and pieces to go? And you can also see an init function here, which just says hello from Backbone in the console when the page is correctly loaded up. And that just means that everything is working correctly, Backbone's properly loaded up, and everything from a scaffolding point of view more or less works. But that's sort of boring. What if we were to actually go to our application view and stick something a little more interesting in there? I wrote a very, very quick Backbone application a few minutes ago. All it's doing is we're working against the body. This is a self-rendering view, and we're just going to append some content to it when the view gets initialized. So I'm just updating the namespaces that I'm working against, and I'm going to return back now to a preview window. Just a second. And what you should see now is Yeoman with hello developers in there. And we've got a view that's working. We've got an application, a very, very simple application, but an application that's working as well. Now, that's all fine, but people are probably also interested in things like the build process.
Right, right.
So,
yeah, there have been a couple of questions online about the build process as well. So, yeah, step us through that a little bit. Is that, by the way, is that related to the HTML5 boilerplate build process that was already included in that?
So what we've done is the Node build script project is part of the HTML5 boilerplate sort of umbrella of projects, and that's sort of a part of Yeoman. We've really taken a look at how to redo that as better as we can, and we've built a lot on top of that to sort of help it a little bit better. Mikhail Daniels is the guy that actually maintains that project, and he's on the Yeoman team, which has been really, really helpful for us. So I'm going to quickly take you through the Yeoman build process. So very similar to the other commands, when I do Yeoman build, it's going to go now and build up the project. It's concatenating all of the scripts, it's minifying everything, and it's producing sort of an optimized version of your project. Somebody earlier was asking on the moderator queue, do we actually support file versioning? And if you take a look at some of the file names that are initially being generated in one of the intermediate steps, the answer to that is yes, we do. We do actually support file versioning. And so what is the Yeoman build process actually doing for you? We'll talk about that very quickly. So when you start building a project, the first thing we're going to do is actually see if there's any optimizations we can make to sort of the scripts and the CSS files, what needs to be compiled. Again, we're talking about Compass and CoffeeScript. We're then going to take a look at the images in your project. We've spent quite a lot of time taking a look at image compression, and we benchmarked a lot of the solutions that are out there at the moment for sort of making the smallest size images with as little sort of lost quality as possible. And that's essentially what we're going to do with your project. We're going to go through all of your images and produce optimal versions of them that hopefully take up less space as well. We're then going to optimize the rest of your payload, regenerate you an application cache manifest. That's something that sometimes developers that are interested in taking a look at offline have challenges with, because not everybody sort of knows the structure to a manifest file. And you sometimes end up having to go back to different articles to try figuring out, okay, well, how should it properly be done? With Yeoman, we automatically generate one of those for you.
And that's, you can just configure it just like you did in, for example, in boilerplate. That was a real huge time saver, or aggravation saver rather, because I remember, because you have to always update that manifest file, and if you forget it, then right. Perfect.
And we, of course, looks like the lights have been turned off here very, very quickly. I'm going to go activate them. Sorry about that.
No problem.
All right. We're also going to do things like run all of your unit tests through Phantom.js, which is going to be doing sort of the headless WebKit testing for you. Another nice thing about the Yeoman generators that we're going to hopefully encourage more developers to do is include automatic scaffolding for basic unit tests to do with the framework. So the Backbone one, or perhaps an Ember one, or an AngularJS one, if you started creating a model, wouldn't it be really cool if it actually also created like a scaffold for your unit tests to go with you? And we're taking a look at that right now. We're hopeful that the generators that we include out of the box with Yeoman are going to include unit test scaffolds so that people can take a look at them for reference. And we hope that we can do our part to encourage developers to give unit testing a really hard thing, because it is an important part of the whole process at the end of the day. Other than that, that's really it for the build process. There are a few other sort of minor optimizations we make to your files. But that's really it. We have a few other commands that sort of help you search through the registry for different dependencies you might need, and other helpers to do with unit testing. But I'm going to very quickly show you an example of a Yeoman generator. This is probably the first sort of public code for Yeoman to show anybody.
Excellent.
So let me see if I can pull it up really quickly. Okay, so you might remember the initial prompt that I showed you at the start, where we asked you if you'd like to include the Twitter Bootstrap plugins and if you'd like to do one or two other things. Now, the code for that is actually hooking into our generator API and our prompts API. And we provided developers with a really, really rich API for sort of doing anything they want with generators. If you want to create a generator that depends on, some different assets from GitHub or from your site or from different servers, we're going to support allowing you to easily pull those in. If you want to easily wire things up, so if you've downloaded perhaps an entire repository as a part of your dependencies, and you only want to filter out a few files, or perhaps you only want to include a few files in the user's index of the user's app, we give you easy methods to let you do those things. And there's a ton of different helpers in place to help you achieve, a lot of the tasks that I think developers that want to write generators are going to want to be able to do. I think one of the moderator questions was, is Yeoman actually going to include all of these generators for, a bunch of different frameworks?
Yeah, it was the one from Yunkeltron from New Haven.
Yes.
Yeah. So what work has been done on generators front, and what will the integration look like with respect to community contributed? Right.
I think that what Yeoman will probably do is we'll probably give developers one or two really, really good scaffolds right out of the box.
Right.
And we might start maintaining a few others, like experimental ones for Backbone and other frameworks outside of the project. But we're going to work with different people in the community, hopefully framework authors, and develop the best set of generators, hopefully. That can be community-driven and can include all the best practices that particular frameworks need to use, and hopefully that'll give people, some want to start creating whole, communities and whole sites full of generators that you can easily share with other people. If somebody doesn't like a particular generator and wants to easily customize it to do other things, they've got an entire API to play around with that they can use to do that. And yeah, I mean, it's extremely simple. Here, for example, is some code that's manually wiring in just a bunch of scripts to do with the Twitter Bootstrap plugins. We also offer ways of just appending entire directories of scripts, for example, in this thing that I've highlighted. Works really, really well with AMD for people that like to use Require.js and AMD modules in their setups. And we've tried to be as sort of comprehensive as possible with what Yeoman lets developers achieve. I don't think that there's sort of a popular setup that the project isn't going to support out of the box.
Great. Fantastic. So, shall we take a look at a couple of the questions from the moderator?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, one of the questions, and some of them you've obviously answered, but we'll just step through them. So the question is, when will Yeoman be available for testing? You touched on this a little bit already, but maybe just to reiterate. This is from Mike from Denver.
So we currently have a sort of private beta open at the moment. Yeoman's been getting quite thankfully a lot of attention. I think we had 6,000 or 7,000 people sign up for the beta in the first few days that it was announced, and so we of course haven't been able to let everybody in just yet, but we're slowly including more and more people as we get closer to an actual release. And we're hopeful that we'll be able to get a release out for everybody to try out in, I think, maybe 2 weeks, so at the end of the month, hopefully.
Okay, excellent.
End of the month, start of the next month. But yeah, it should be soon.
Yeah, and they can follow at Yeoman on Twitter, and do you have a Google Plus page as well?
Yeah, all of the links to these to our pages are on yeoman.io. And any information about the project that we're going to be posting, whether it's sort of previews of ideas that we're trying out or things that are definitely going to be in the project that we've just sort of implemented and are going to be coming closer to a release date, those will all be on Twitter or our Google Plus page, and we encourage people to check those out.
Excellent. So another question from Mooseman on the internet. Can I use Yeoman for minification optimization of existing or my already built project. That's actually interesting, right? Because you might actually, I was thinking about the same thing. It's like, well, I'd like to get that on an existing project. Is that possible?
So as of today, it isn't just yet, but we are working this week on ways that we can make that happen. It's really a case of just making sure that a few specific configuration files get written into your directory without sort of overwriting anything else going on with your application. But it should be, I think it's something we're going to aim to get in place before our launch.
Okay, great. Yeah, and there was another question just like it, so that's from Dylan Green, so the same answer. What about plans for documentation generation, like, for example, Doco? That was a question from Meliel.
So we don't currently have sort of an automatic documentation generation task in place just yet. But I did read that question the other day, and I thought, that's actually a really cool idea.
Yeah.
And so we've started discussions on maybe using Doco or another solution. Whether that's something that makes it into the first version of the project, I'm not sure. But it's definitely something that we're looking at the moment, and might make its way into Yeoman in the future.
Perfect. So then a question from Guario. What kind of MVC generators will you include at the launch? So you mentioned the architecture, maybe just to double to check on that again. So what is the current plan? It mentioned Backbone, Ember, Knockout.
So I think what we'll probably do there, and we haven't sort of we haven't got a firm plan for this just yet, but what we'll probably do is have sort of community maintained Yeoman generators for things like Backbone and Ember.
Right.
We do have sort of proof of concepts in place at the moment. I was showing you the Backbone one.
Right.
We've also got a proof of concept of the Ember one and an AngularJS one, and a few for sort of other frameworks. And what we want to make sure of is that, obviously we do have some experience with these other frameworks, but the people using them, the framework authors, are going to be ones that know exactly what should be going into a proper boilerplate scaffold. And we'd like to work with those people perhaps to get the best set of generators done, and maybe they'll be better people to maintain them.
Yeah, exactly.
So Yeoman out of the box, I think we'll try to get, we might try to get an AngularJS one done, included in the release, but other than that, it's going to be community maintained generators for everything else.
Okay, excellent. Now, there's a question from Current in Vancouver. Any plans for native live reload functionality that isn't dependent on live reload itself? What do you have for live reloading?
So our current setup allows you can use live reload if you have it installed and you prefer to use that system. We do recommend people try that, but we've got a fallback that will work pretty much in any browser that will automatically sort of refresh your page if you make changes to it. It's not as good as the live reload one, which is why we recommend using that, but we do have sort of a cross-browser solution in place. So yes, I guess is the answer.
Great. Another question from Kay Lanny. Will it be possible to use Yeoman with something like Ember.js or Meteor? Now, you mentioned Ember already, but any Meteor integration? I
guess it's the same. It's the same thing that I would say about any other framework. We're going to provide developers with all of the APIs that they need to write generators to work with any framework. So whether it's Ember or Meteor or something else, it should be possible to write a scaffold that'll work with it.
Yeah. Perfect. I think a couple more questions. Is Yeoman using NPM for package management, or what is it using under the covers? Like Levi Dehaan was asking that. So for our own
of some node dependencies, we are using NPM for that. But what we actually have for everything else, so what you saw me doing when I was pulling in jQuery and Backbone, I was using a project by Twitter, which hasn't been released just yet, called Bower. And Bower is another package management solution.
How do you spell that?
So it's BOWER.
Okay.
And the idea there is it's going to be sort of another registry, but one which sort of framework authors and library authors and people that do create different scripts to be used by other people can easily push Two, it's easy to use, and as you saw with Yeoman, it's fairly easy to replicate some of the stuff that npm does, just easily installing a dependency, searching for it, and resolving the other bits and pieces that it might need.
Perfect, perfect. So one of the questions you already answered in the in your earlier demo was the automated file versioning. This was from Mike in New York. Any plans to add automated file versioning, a checksum added as a query parameter? But you mentioned that you were thinking about that, or will that also make it into...
That's already in place.
Okay, okay. Fantastic, fantastic. Well, let's see. In the event of Yeoman's success and popularity, how soon can we expect Yeoman's swag?
That's a good question. We're currently working on swag, and you can probably expect to see some in the very near future.
Right. Now that's just about as serious as the other question from Charles of when can I get paid? Yeah. No, so in all seriousness, where can people... You mentioned Yeoman.io is the main site, and they can from there they can follow you along. What other, if you wanted to add your name to the list of the private beta, is that still possible?
You can currently do that through Yeoman.io.
Okay.
As I mentioned, we are sort of, for people that are interested in either helping out with the project or sort of really testing it out to its limits at the moment. We are letting a few people in right now as part of the private beta. We will be opening Yeoman up to the public in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. And yeah, Yeoman.io is going to be the place to be. That's where we're going to launch the whole new website. The holding page is going to go, and everything is going to be up there, from the documentation to where you can get it.
Fantastic. Great. So, well, I think... Did you have any other facts or tips and tricks to share with us, or I think that's pretty much it, right?
I think that's pretty much it. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter or Google+, and yeah, Yeoman should be out soon.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for the great demo. We'll take care of the... I think we took care of all the questions. If we didn't, then my apologies, and we'll answer them offline. And check out Yeoman.io for all of the information. Sign up there for the private beta. And that's it. Well, thank you for joining, and until next time. Thanks. Thanks, Addy.
Thanks.